Welcome, welcome, welcome everyone to the session. That was a performance from the Leap Maths and Science Schools Kwalanga in Cape Town. And Neliswa will be sharing more about Leap as we get into the session. Thank you so much for joining us to our session at the Learning Planet Festival hosted by the Ubuntu Learning Circle, the Club of Rome, and the Learning Planet Institute called African Youth Reinventing the Future, an incredibly ambitious title. My name is Zunolita Mvunelo. I'm a program manager at the Club of Rome based in Cape Town, South Africa. The Club of Rome is a platform of diverse thought leaders who identify holistic solutions to complex global issues. The aim is to help humanity emerge from current crises to systems geared towards global equity on a healthy planet. Part of this involves inviting communities or networks of individuals, like those of you here with us today, to collaborate on activities where everyone is empowered in their own context, fostering opportunities for a shift in perspective and learning that would allow us to see the world differently with an aim to create the conditions for real change and transformation to happen. Joining us today is a wide array of members of this community who are going to share insights and provocations about the central topic. This is meant to be a conversation, so please do share in the chat your perspectives, but also to just, when the opportunity presents itself, to unmute and feel free to ask questions. There is plenty of time in the session where there is an opportunity to ask those questions. But before we go ahead, I'd like to give the floor to my superstar colleague, Catherine Brown from Learning Planet, to share more about Learning Planet Institute and the Ubuntu Learning Circle. Thanks, Catherine.
Thank you, superstar moderator Nolita. I really appreciate being able to co-host this space with you and with our colleague Brad as well, who's also joining us from Club of Rome as a back-end facilitator. But yeah, I would like to just echo what Nolita was saying. I'm so grateful that all of you have come here as speakers and as participants in this really exciting session. And just to ground the discussion in the Ubuntu Learning Circle values, we have 3 goals as the Ubuntu Learning Circle group. And this is a circle of practitioners, activists, academics, people from all different walks of life and from all across the globe who are committed to living out the values of Ubuntu, meaning we are because I am loosely translated. So our 3 goals are to firstly identify and connect a network of actors addressing learning for sustainability in Africa across the continent in remarkable ways. And secondly, to identify inspiring place-based learning for sustainability projects across all African countries and communities. And beyond that, we would like to, as a group, identify and conduct flagship projects to support as a learning circle. And this is part of our goal as a learning planet to join forces to better understand how to look after ourselves, others, and the planet. And really that is at the heart of this festival, and that's at the heart of this circle as well. And just a few numbers about the festival. So last year we were really delighted to have over 20,000 participants joining us from across the world. And this year we're excited to bring you even more opportunities to learn and connect with others. The festival starts every year on the 24th of January, which is the International Day of Education. And we run for 5 days until the 28th of January. So there are still sessions to see, and we really hope that you can join us sessions during the festival if you haven't joined already. But thank you so much for coming to this session, and we hope that if this is the only session that you come to, you take a lot from it. And with over 500 events during this festival this year, and 350 partner organizations and representation from over 100 countries, this Learning Planet Festival really is a global alliance. And this year we're really excited to be focusing more on our African partners and growing our African partners, and also focus on the concept of Ubuntu, emphasizing the interconnectedness and the interdependence of all living things. And yeah, as I mentioned before, sustainability is at the core of everything that we do here. And we're really looking forward to sharing this inspiring and impactful festival with you all. And this event is just a taste of the focus on Africa that we're intending to grow throughout the coming year as well. And just watch the space for more to come. Thank you so much, and I hope you enjoy the session. Back to you, Lisa.
Thank you so much, Catherine. Without further ado, without too much introduction, I'd like to start by introducing our first speaker, Dr. Ndidi Noli-Edozian, who is an executive committee member at the Club of Rome and a board member at the International Sustainability Standards Board. Please go ahead, Dr. Ndidi.
Thanks, Nolita. Thanks for bringing us together today. This was awesome. Great start with that dance. I loved it. Felt the energy completely. Takes me back to one of the things you prompted me to talk about, which is it's hard to believe that it's 20 years ago when the think tank 30, which was Club of Rome's effort to initiate and bring the youth into the Club of Rome as a voice was started. The intention was there, but it's just fascinating to me that here we are 20 years later. And part of the reason why my sense is that the global youth are leading is because Africa's voice is heard and is strong, and because we're building on concepts of community. How did you put it so nicely? Ourselves, others, and the planet. Kind of forget ourselves, but only in the context of community and only in the context of our interconnectedness and interdependence with nature. And that's also not just in Ubuntu, but in Ubuntu is replicated or is seen and found as a foundation in many other African cultures. And that's really fascinating because we are in a time when actually we're moving beyond the concept of the nation state or countries as our home. And we're moving right back to who are we? Humanity. It's interesting that very often Africa is referred to as the cradle of humanity, and humanity exists in communities. So in a lot of our traditional African cultures, the essence of the human person is found in community and in the context of nature. We don't separate them, but rather they're interconnected. And in that interconnection, interdependence, and integration, which is interesting because I'm sitting here in South Africa representing the International Sustainability Standards Board, which is in the process of building a global baseline for sustainability, has started with general sustainability disclosures and, of course, climate first, but not climate only. And the four big themes that we're talking about, which I wanted to speak to very briefly, in the next agenda consultation towards the next set of standards include human rights, include human capital, include connectivity or integration, and include biodiversity. Now, what's really important, and the reason why I want to talk about that is because the future is when. When is it? It's now. And the future is who? The future is the youth. It is the generation that is coming. But then in that, I put in a small caveat that says, whenever I do talk to Carlos, who is the vice president of the Club of Rome, when we have our real conversation, we remind ourselves to have a conversation like 6-year-olds. So that's a very, very conscious effort. So in other words, if you're not thinking about the future and the future as how, I think one of the things that Mampela always says, and I saw her on the screen earlier, is we have 2 ears and 1 mouth. So in other words, listening and being able to listen, but above all, also we do have a mouth for a purpose. And that mouth is actually to speak up. It's to shape the future. And what is happening in this room, what is happening in terms of, if I think about the last session we had where we talked about digital for life, one of the tools and one of the means that the younger generation has that the older generation did not have as much of is the integration of technology and digital into the future. And at the end of the day, what is really important is that we retain our humanity in all of that, that we take these tools and don't let the tools take us, but that we are actually building new narratives of hope, creating a common future, building a transcendence that actually goes beyond nations, beyond gender, beyond age, beyond location, and are really building communities which tie in really nicely with the objectives that I just learned about the Ubuntu Learning Circle, namely connecting networks of actors who are building place-based learning, because the place that we're in is really critical. But the fact that we're leaning on that place does not stop it from being a global mission, which is why the interconnection and the flagship projects that bring together ourselves, others, across different communities, across different boundaries, and the planet towards building a common future is really critical. So all I want to end with is just to say that this is a really important forum. It's absolutely critical. I'm really excited that 20 years later, it's not just that we have the voice of the next generation at the core of the Club of Rome and the voice of Africa at the core of the Club of Rome, but also that we have the principles of Ubuntu that are guiding our actions, and that these three principles are actually leading a lot of our interaction, a lot of our thought, because the world needs to hear this voice. It's absolutely critical. And it's at the cusp of defining and redefining what the future is, who the future is, and how we should live.
Thank you so much, Doc. Thank you so much. Our next speaker is Luvuyo Matasa, who is Executive Director at Reimagine South Africa and a Junior Fellow at the World Academy of Art and Science. Please go ahead, Luvuyo.
Thank you, Nolita. Molweni, good morning. Please allow me to start by thanking our guests who've taken the time to join us online today. A big thank you to the organizers and fellow contributors for all you've put into preparing for this morning's discussion. In Xhosa, we say sibamba ngazo zozibini. So I've been asked to discuss what African youth, what it means that African youth reinventing the future. And thank you for that question, Nolita. But as you said during our briefing call, I've graduated from youth to an elder. So in accepting that role as a panel elder, I'd like to avoid speaking on behalf of African youth and rather allow me to pose the two following challenges to the panel. The first is to our panel elders, and I like the introduction that Prof. Ndindi has just shared, which is around, as we listen to the panel and what they have to say, can we reflect on how we as the elders can landscape the terrain to support and scale the impact of the ideas, interventions, and recommendations that will be shared today. My hope is that in hearing the ideas that the youth may have, we may benefit from sparking insights that support the communities each of us and those listening in online continue to serve and impact in the work that we do on an ongoing daily basis. The second I'd like the panel to actually consider is to consider replacing reinventing with co-creating. I say this with all respect to the inventors because I saw the profiles of my fellow panelists and the work that they do and the problems that they're solving. But my experience with engaging with the term inventing and reinventing is that it tends to prematurely box us into a space where we are discussing perspectives of IP and ownership. And I would like to rather re-invite us to replace with co-create, and in so doing, bring in the open source ethos of Ubuntu to today's discussion. And with those two requests in mind, I'd like to specifically pose the question of African youth co-creating the future to the 4 people who are 25 years and younger on this panel. I direct this question to you not only to embrace my newly announced role as an elder, at least for this panel, but to help listen in closer to the younger change makers on the panel and the realities that they contend with. And in listening, hopefully can reach into my own personal experiences in my journey to see how I can potentially support not only through this platform, but the work that we do as Reimagine SA. So allow me to share a personal story to illustrate my reasoning behind the invitation for us to listen closer to our youth. So I have a love-hate relationship with these platforms, especially when they table topics that are so daunting. Don't get me wrong, I love the brave intent of what we're discussing, but I genuinely get disheartened by the lack of follow-through with practical, relatable, and accessible solutions. I've been grappling with this ever since I was invited to a global conference, much like this one, some 9 years ago in Johannesburg. It was a 3-day conference that brought 1,200 youth from around the world to deal with big, scary topics, much like what we're doing today. They also then brought in impressive leaders who either gave keynote addresses or contributed to panel discussions. But after these big names had spoken, I couldn't help but shake that feeling that why is the majority of the time spent listening to people who have been contributors, whether actively or passively, to the reality that we're actually contending with? and what it would look like if we spent more time listening to the young people whose fresh new ideas can inspire us to look at our reality and our context much differently. I must say I'm excited to see that our moderators and the Collective Learning Festival team and the partners to this Learning Festival have structured the conversations in a way that is currently challenging that tendency. So to support the structure of today's discussion, I would like to encourage those that are 25 years and younger on this panel to tell us elders what role, if any, we can play in African youth co-creating the future. While I anticipate that you'll enthusiastically engage and share in the work that you actually do, I invite you to share the following two contexts. What does an enabling environment to co-create our future look like for you? And if there is anything that you need from us as fellow panelists, the conference organizers, partners, and sponsors to help you facilitate co-created reality. And with that, I'd like to say thank you and look forward to our discussion today.
Thank you so much. Those are such thought-provoking questions, because that is the point of this conversation, right? That's why we said it's a conversation and not a webinar, and everyone has camera access and mic access, because the intention is to take that step forward on how do we co-create the future? How do we co-create the solutions for this? At this point, to these prompting questions, I would actually like for us to go into breakout rooms so we can have this conversation and then come back into the room and have these conversations in smaller groups and come back into the room and really maybe take a provocative step forward on maybe sharing our experiences, because I have a very similar experience that you have, Luvio, on, you know, going to a big conference with big ambitions and then not being quite too sure about, okay, what does this turn into? What does this mean? You know, how do I get involved? How do I continue to be involved? Or what can I do in my own context? So the invitation to get into these breakout rooms is, one, to just meet everyone who's in this, who's in this call, because the first point is maybe to just ground ourselves in the people who are around us. It's not a detached experience of hearing people speak and then continuing going back to where you are, but taking a moment to have the connection of introducing ourselves, sharing the work that we do, and then because we have, I believe, somewhere around 8 minutes, having it also enough time to then pondering on the question, and we will come back into the big plenary for everyone to please share in the chat, or maybe just raise your hand to share what it is or what you want to share on the points that Luvio and Dr. Ndidi had raised. So Rada, Catherine, if you can please go ahead and create those breakout rooms. Thank you. We're back in the main room. I don't know about your room, but we had a good chance to just connect and meet everyone who was in room one. As well, we took a little bit more time because, you know, the introductions, and it was good to ground everyone in who is in the conversation, get to meet each other, etc. It's not as, like I said earlier, did not want to have a disconnected conversation where we join passively and we don't have a chance to meet each other. But may you please share on the chat some of the key points in your discussion. And while that is happening, I will go ahead and introduce the next speaker, who is Unoxolo Mthethwa, who is co-founder and CEO of Boost South Africa. So Unoxolo, may you please go ahead.
Thank you so much, Nolita, and good morning to everyone. I believe that in order to create a sustainable future, we don't have to look only into the present to determine the future, but we have the responsibility to look into the past and draw from some of the profound foundations that were laid by our ancestors, and they laid a very good foundation for Africa and her prosperity. And I believe that some of these profound systems were unfortunately stolen by the colonial past that clouds the history of the continent today. I strongly believe that the current economic model is centered around exploitation. It's the exploitation of people, resources, environment, and the planet in general, which is contrary to what indigenous Africans built. They built systems that were centered around the principles of Ubuntu, which is the spirit of togetherness, sharing, and collaboration. These systems were built on the foundation of community, cooperation, and mutual support, but unfortunately, they were not sustainable in the long run. And there's a need for us to revisit and reinvent some of the systems that they created for us. And I do believe that the youth of Africa have a unique opportunity to learn from the past and to build on the strengths of these traditional systems, while also incorporating new technologies, ideas, and sustainable practices. I believe that if we work together across generations, cultures, and borders, African youth can build inclusive, equitable, and sustainable systems that will secure the future for all. One of the things that we have seen with the exploitative model that we see today is that it is not inclusive. And I believe that technology is at the center of bringing everyone into the table and making sure that everyone can participate in this prosperity that we so much desire for Africa and her people. So one of the interventions that I think are going to take us forward is creating technologies, especially ones that will foster financial inclusion. What I've seen in our communities is that a lot of people lose their voices, dignity, and are mostly subject to every form of abuse because economically they are not prospering, which opens huge doors for exploitation. So I believe that if we can create tools that will make sure that we reach this collective prosperity that we speak of, that will then lead to sustainable development of humanity. So I believe that is one of the things that we need to look at seriously, is to create a digital currency for Africans that is designed by Africans as well. You know, drawing from those lessons, one of the things that we have looked at recently is integrating what in South Africa we call stokvels, which are an indigenous saving platforms for a lot of people in the townships and rural areas. And I do believe that if we go back into those indigenous systems and we use technology not as an end itself, but as a tool that will then amplify the work that we are doing to make sure that we bring about the prosperity and the inclusion that we are looking at. So I believe that at the center of every model that we create should be people. And I think Ubuntu and that principle of Ubuntu brings people at the center of every human design. So I believe that if we look at human-centered design solutions that are not going to look at people as a workforce to be exploited, that are not going to look at the environment in order to exploit, but look at all these resources that can create and make sure that we are led into a more prosperous future where everything, not just people, but everything is prospering. And I do believe that technology and digital tools can bring about that solution and can lead us to that future. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So we're speaking of technology, we're speaking on its role in creating the future. And on that note, also, I will ask the next speaker to intervene, which is Bolaji, co-founder.
My contribution would be covered in a number of points, not that many. I think my first contribution relates to laying the foundation. For the young people in the room, I want you to see something in your mind. Today, this time, this day, it's not the future, it's the present. But today that we call the present actually is the future for everybody, or used to be the future for everybody that is between 45 and 75 right now. So today that is the present is actually the future that our leaders of note created for us. And in their time, 45, 60 years ago, the existential issue for mankind was, at least in Africa, was the issue of independence, political independence. Can we be free of the colonial system? But today, those issues that are existential for the future are slightly different. And that takes me to my second point. And I want to pick on the comment in the chat room that somebody wrote that Madam Mamfela said, Dr. Mamfela said, which is about being bold. The future that we should see in our minds and create is a future that should be very different from the present that we are in today. The issues of our time are issues that relate to environment. Can we live together with the planet in a way that is balanced, not in a way that is exploitative, as Noxie said? The existential issue of our time relates to community. Can we interact together as a global community of mankind? Because today we are kind of separated by borders, by states. So, and you see it in the way we introduce ourselves. We introduce ourselves as Nigerians, Kenyans, South Africans. Why are we not introducing ourselves as people? You know, why is the physical border dominating our mind so much? And then the future that we are co-creating together is a future in which two things now, in my view, have to serve people. Businesses have to serve people, technology has to serve people. Today, in the present now, people more or less serve technology and people serve businesses. Can we change that relationship? So I would leave you with some closing comments. The future that is coming is a future very different from the future that we are in today, which is the present. I think in the future that we should create together with boldness, it should be a future in which we think of the whole world as one, not as many. A future in which we use emerging technologies that are coming up to really, really serve mankind. For example, recently you hear about artificial intelligence that everybody is asking questions. You hear about blockchain's infrastructure that is democratizing access to the ability of countries and communities to create currency. And you hear about all kinds of things. So can we be super, super bold? So as a young person today that is 20 and above, be bold. Remember today, you are the freedom fighter of this time. You know, so, and the freedom now is not necessarily political. I think it's more about sustainability. Those would be my short contribution. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to participate.
Thank you so much. The freedom fighters of this time. Wow. And you spoke also about what is dominating our minds. So I actually very well could then introduce our next speaker, who's Yolisa Malo, because she's a program coordinator of an organization called Beyond Expectations Environmental Project. So Yolisa, please go ahead. You're on mute.
Hello. Hello, everyone. My name is Yolisa Malo, and I am I'm a member of the Expectation Environmental Project, which is an environmental organization that deals with environmental issues. Like I said on the other room, we also tackle issues beyond just environmental issues, which basically means that we also deal with things like trying to help a child help heal and find their own voice, and helping them get rather better, or based on one of the questions that was saying that we help kids regain their confidence, or rather, if there wasn't, to try and make sure that they are in the right path. So what we do in the organization is we start, for example, when I started the organization in 2011, I joined the organization just as a kid, trying to learn about environmental issues. And I think what excited me initially about the whole organization is that we're told that we're going to go on a hike. And I was like, ooh, we're going to go out, it's an excursion. And I was excited about that. And then as the years went by, I learned more, not just about environmental issues, but also trying to find myself. Because I remember for the very first time when I was given an opportunity to do a presentation, I literally cried. And reason being was that it wasn't because I was scared of the people I was talking to, because it was all my classmates. It was people that I constantly talked to on a continuous basis. My friends were in the room, but I cried because I was standing in front of those people. I think it was a lack of confidence. It was being scared and not knowing, not being sure whether or not my voice was going to be worth anything, or whether what I was about to say was valuable enough for me to even be standing in front of people and having those conversations with them. But as time went by, I grew within the organization, and I became one of the mentors that was assisting young leaders within the organization from different primary schools that we work with in our communities that include Ifilipi, that include Ikailicha, that include Hautbe, that include Enyanga, and Kukuletu. So we're really trying to assist those kids, starting from where I started, learning about environmental issues, and then eventually helping them with their schoolwork, helping them deal with their own social issues that they were dealing with from home. Like, for example, we would find, like, we would take kids from our townships, right, and go to Table Mountain and would say, find a space for yourself. Like, we create a space and say, there's a place that we normally go to, Kwapi, and we up Table Mountain. It's called, we call it Mpilisweni, which is a space where we just go sit in circle, and we create a space for all the kids to speak, to create a safe environment for all of them to like speak about themselves, to speak about the issues that they are faced with, to create a space where they can talk without the fear of being judged about who they are or what they've been through in life, and try to find then solutions to the problems. And the nice thing I think I've always loved about the organization is how we don't necessarily put people in spaces where, okay, so then let's find like a solution. It's not a everyone type thing. It's let's help you find a solution to your problem. And then eventually you find yourself being able to speak. Like eventually I was able to stand in front of groups of people and be able to speak with confidence without any fear of making a mistake, because it's okay to make those mistakes. And then as the years went by, we grew to be part of the managerial team that then organized the hikes, that organized the camps, that organized the workshops. We would help the child eventually after passing grade 7 to high school, help them with their schoolwork in high school, and then eventually go to university like I am currently. And we take the kids, we constantly the continuous thing where we take kids up Table Mountain to try and make sure that they are okay, to try and make sure that they are in the right space of mind, because we are currently faced with issues or things such as depression, anxiety, and constant stress based because of our schoolwork and all of those things. So we try really and help out our youth, and myself included in that pack, to make sure that we are holistically okay. And then eventually then we can start dealing with issues such as, okay, now how do we find school? Like, for example, currently we're working with a group of grade 12s who are doing grade 12s rather last year and are currently preparing to go to university. And we've been helping them apply or register at school because they've already applied, then they've been accepted in multiple universities all around South Africa. And now they're going to go study all these different courses that are incredible. So basically the organization has helped not just me, but a number of kids find themselves and find confidence in themselves and believe that they are able and they can do these things that maybe just from based on our families, because like, for example, like I was saying, we are the first in our families to go to university. We are the first in our families to get jobs rather to study the careers that we're currently studying. And we're doing all these incredible things, and all thanks to B and the organization. And with me, I just happen to stick within the organization, and some of them are still within the system. And some of them are not necessarily still part of the organization, but they are still part of the system because we do communicate them and meet with them every now and again to check what a person is doing and how they can bring about change, or rather create a domino effect of what has been done to us and created, or rather try and assist those that are coming after us. To make sure that our communities are better, to make sure that our communities are creating, or rather have leaders that, or rather are creating young leaders that are wanting to have change in their lives, creating a space where we are making sure that the youth understand the value of education, not just education, but also finding themselves, being confident in all of those things, and then eventually becoming a better person who then comes back into the community to assist. That's what the organization has taught us, and what the organization continues to assist us with, trying to assist the kids really the best way we can in our own capacity, to make sure that we create a better society for ourselves, to make sure that we create a number of scholars that eventually then come back and assist our communities to hopefully become better in future years to come. That's what Yelisa Malo, that's who I am and what the organization is about. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Yolisa, and sharing the wonderful work that is happening through BEEP. The next speaker is Binti Zani, who is a youth council member and coordinator at Kwale County SDSN in Kenya. Please go ahead, Binti. I'm not sure if you're on mute, but we can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can. Please go ahead.
Thank you. So from my understanding from this particular topic, what I started with is trying to understand, when you talk about reinventing, what exactly do we mean? And not just the literary definition, but as an African, as a young individual who's interested in ensuring that we come up with a better Africa, what does this mean for me? Does it mean adopting entirely a new approach, maybe perhaps when you talk about things like problem solving, or does it also mean borrowing from what you already have? Is it changing everything? I mean, are we crossing out and changing everything from scratch, or is it just some aspects? Is there anything that we could borrow from our indigenous values? And the reason why I'm using a lot of I or we is because I do believe that Africa is our individual responsibility. It all comes down to what we do. What am I doing for Africa as an individual? Then afterwards, you can see how we can create synergies or rather harmonies between all our efforts. And something else I like to think about, or rather pose this question to my fellow youth, is who exactly are we reinventing Africa for? What is our intrinsic motivation behind reinventing Africa? Is there a problem that you'd like to solve? Is there something that you're already working on? Is your motivation wanting to represent your people on the global stage? What is your vision for Africa eventually? Ultimately, what does your contribution, what are the actions that you're taking mean to Africa? What, as we are Africans, gaining from you and your actions? Another thing is that as Africans, one of our inheritance from our forefathers is the gift of storytelling. So what is your story as an African youth? What is our story as Africans and who's telling it? Who are we allowing to go out there and tell the story of Africa? Do we choose to stay in Africa and experience our own stories so that we are confident enough to tell them? And when we do go out there, what story are you telling about Africa through your words and your actions? But at the same time, we do live in a world whereby everything is moving into the digital space right now. And especially with technology, I do believe that as Africans, we do have brilliant minds. And with the creative solutions that we come up with, there's so much more we can do. And right now, there's actually so little stopping us as compared to before. Right now, we have so many tools in our hands that we could use to serve Africa and to liberate Africa from the problems that we are known of. Is there any other way we can work to create an economy and future that will serve us and not the other way around? A continent where every African is self-sufficient. We have so many resources in Africa, and if we do change our perspectives and start looking at what we can do with what we have instead of what we can't do because of what we don't have, then Africa is then Africa is just one step away from becoming the Africa that we want as youth. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. As you said something about what story are you telling about Africa through your words and your actions, which is a great lead through to our last speaker, who is Nelisa Nyandine, a spokesperson at the Leap Maths and Science School. As when we started the session, we started with a performance by the students at Leap. And so it would be really great to then hear from Nelisa more about herself, her work, but also Leap. Thank you, Nelisa.
Thank you, Nolita, and thank you, everyone. A simple statement repeated through thousands of images, newspaper stories, charity appeals. Africa is poor, but we can try and help its people. When we read it, we reinforce assumptions and stories about Africa that we have heard throughout our lives. We reconfirm our idea and our image of Africa. But I invite you in this moment to try something different. Africa is not poor, but we are stealing its wealth. And it's time for us to change the way we talk and think about Africa. I have something that I'm going to share for a few minutes. "70% of Black children live without their biological dads at home, and this is only in South Africa. Of the 989,318 babies that were born in South Africa in 2018, about 61% of them have information. About 61% of them don't have information about their fathers in their birth certificates. Out of that, the council estimates that about 60% of South African children have absent fathers. 1 in 5 women report that they have experienced gender-based violence at the hands of their partner. 51% of women in South Africa say they have experienced gender-based violence. 76% of men say that they have perpetrated gender-based violence at one stage of their lives. The rate of past 2022 is 67%. And with the suicide epidemic that we are currently facing, there are about 13,774 suicides that were reported in the year 2019. And out of that number, 10,861 people were men, and the rest, which is 2,000 and odd, were females. Now, this got me thinking, if these are the numbers that we're currently facing, yet we always tweak and try and alter the system so that we can try and get some form of instant gratification, but 3 years down the line, we go back to point zero where we were facing. What do we need to do? Now, this led me to point number 3 in the Africa Akili Declaration, which reads, "We are responsible to future generations. We aspire to be good future elders and ancestors, to ensure the well-being of those who will inherit our legacy." Now, who will inherit our legacy? It's probably a 10 or a 15-year-old. But what do they think when they sit and they look at all that is happening around them? What are they crying for? What are they yearning for?
Ro, do you have any words of inspiration that you want to give to other young people looking into camera?
I want to say, but I want to pray.
You want to pray? Okay. We can do that.
Can you guys unmute?
Yeah, sure.
Dear Lord,
Dear Lord,
I am thankful
I am thankful
that I can wake up
that I can wake up
in the morning,
not hurt
by the spirits of evil.
by the spirits of evil.
We rebuke them with all our heart.
We rebuke them with all our heart.
Please keep us safe
Please keep us safe
and wrap us in peace.
and wrap us around in your wings.
We all have them,
We all have them,
and we rebuke them.
and we rebuke all evil spirits.
Now, to me, that doesn't sound like we have young people that are yearning to be scientists. It doesn't sound like we have young people that are yearning for large science labs. It doesn't sound like we are yearning for young people to have insufficient amount of toys so that they can brag about them to their peers. But what I think we have young people that are yearning for protection. We have young people that are yearning for a sense of belonging. We have young people that are yearning to be valued. We have young people that are yearning and are pleading for you to say you matter. Your story matters. Your voice matters. I care. Your pain matters. And my pain doesn't make your pain any less. So I think we have young people that need to be in touch with themselves. We have young people that need to be in touch with who they are. We have young people that need to be healed. And I think that can only be done through education, but not just any education, through consciousness education. So I think consciousness education needs to be a key focal point for a shift to a successful African education system. But how do we do that? One of the panelists, Nokolo, mentioned something. She mentioned tech. Uyolisa Malu also mentioned the environmental aspects of life. Now we have the LEAP Institute, and the LEAP Institute thrives in 6 different levers. The one is closing the digital divide. It goes without saying that we are moving to the 4th industrial revolution. We all know that everyone now wants to be tech savvy. However, if we are going to strive and thrive for everyone to be just tech savvy without the self-liberation that goes into it, then we're going to miss the point. We want our people to be enlightened. We want our people to be informed. And when people are informed, then they are empowered. Also, I mentioned something in our breakaway sessions that we had earlier, that we need to step away from seeing the fundamental literacies as our key competencies. There are 3 different segments in education. There's fundamental literacies, which are all your subjects. Then there are your competencies, which are your problem-solving skills, your communication, your critical thinking, your ability to communicate, and your ability to collaborate with other people. Those are competencies that will make you thrive in a workspace. Then there's the key character traits that an individual needs to have. The fundamental literacies can always be brought up later, but we always make these fundamental literacies competencies which are not. So in the LEAP Institute, we said they are values over value. So yes, maths is important, but Ubuntu in the mathematics is more important. Yes, it's important for you to get a 98%, but how you got there is more important. So for me to assist you with the maths equation doesn't make me any lesser in maths. It doesn't take away my mark, but if I improve your mark, I also improve my mark in return. There's the transaction of Ubuntu. I'm helping you because you are, because I am. Then there's the environmental part that Yolisa Malu spoke about. So we have the LEAP Learning and Living Laboratories. And we believe that science can be everywhere. The point that the mere fact that you're listening to me speaking right now, and you're probably feeling something, is science. When you step outside and you breathe in oxygen and you breathe out carbon dioxide, that's science. When you go to the back of your yard, if you have, and there's a plant growing, that's science. When the sun hits the leaf and something grows, that's science. But it's science with the natural chemicals. It's science with the natural nutrients. It's science that has water in abundance, sun in abundance, air in abundance, natural resources that we have in Africa. Yet we say, no, our students or our kids can't learn science because we don't have science lab. We don't have the money to fund these science labs when you build them for us. No, they don't have the white coats that people need in order for them to be considered safe in a science lab. But when you look around, there's science all around you. And then there's the transformational leadership. When you're a leader and you lead people, and in return, they also become leaders, then your leadership methods have been effective. So I think instead of us teaching young people to memorize and then reiterate what they have been taught, I think we need to teach them how to be leaders. And then there's the values-based consciousness raising. Teach young people who they are so that they can know who they are not. If I know who I am not, then I know what I don't go through. I know what I don't entertain. I know the conversations that I don't even partake in because that's not me. And that's not embedded in the rules of the school, but it's embedded in the value system that is in my conscious. And then lastly, it's the work readiness. There's a huge gap after matric to starting work. There's a huge gap. It's either people don't know how to conduct themselves in a workplace, or people matriculate, and then there's an additional amount of people that are now unemployed, not because they are inadequate, not because they lack anything, but because they are not ready for the work sector. So we say if we practice these 6 levers, then I think we can be able to reimagine a greater Africa and a better Africa for all of us. And lastly, imagine if we have all those 6 levers in each and every part of our educational platform. Imagine if we had a garden in every school, then the food insecurity wouldn't be a thing. Poverty wouldn't be a thing. Bad well-being wouldn't be a thing because you're eating nutrients, you're eating straight what's from the ground. If people are aware of who they are, then their intellect is better. If people are aware of who they are, then they don't need to lay a hand on you in order for them to prove their masculinity. And this is but just a few of the examples that we are currently facing. And then lastly, I'd like to end up with these words. Wake up, O Africa. With the heavy load you suffer, a substance not needed, yet it drags you, cushioning your efforts and deterring your pace, forgetting that the train is already moving, with passengers determined for this journey. Why get so distracted by passers-by focused to catch up, putting you each time a step backwards? Can't you realize that the train is already moving, with passengers determined for this journey? It seems you're the only one left, and this is solely your doing, with no one to blame, and the rest definitely have no added advantage over you. So stop acting weak, because the train is already moving, with passengers determined for this journey. Wake up, Africa. You get your independence just to become a volunteer slave. You live in a mansion, yet have no place to sleep. Stop acting like a bucket of crabs, killing each other just to get out and copy the ants. United and networking for a common cause. You fight just for a coin underneath the table, when on it's a box full of this same treasure. Despite knowing how to reach out to its top, you neglect such knowledge and accept conflicts, violence, and wars. Settling for good enough is worse than being bad. When you make a step out of 1,000 more, you show unbelievable contentment to mediocrity and underachievements. If their queen puts their fate on the lizards, is what will befall you, not until you wake up. Oh, Africa. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Neliso. We've hit a lot of themes today, and I see that the chat is also very alive, and there's a lot of clicking and there's a lot of raising hands. And we've also gotten to the very exciting part of this where it is now open for everyone to please raise their hand if they'd like to share their thoughts or ask a question to some of the people who have spoken today. We've touched on technology, we've touched on entrepreneurship, there has been a constant thread on values and self-awareness and self-liberation. Dr. Ndidi started on the intergenerational dialogue and why it is important, but also representing this history of how we got here to this conversation today. And then also we spoke about action and follow through. So there's quite a lot that has been mentioned today. And I invite everyone to please raise your hand, ask a question, or just share an insight on this topic that we have today. A prompting question that I have also is, what positive steps can this community take to progress this agenda? And we already have a hand, so Louise, please go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to say, as an elder in the room, these young people are inspirational beyond ends. We just need your voices heard more and more. Tell us what we can do to help your voices be heard. We're inspired. I am.
Thank you. Yeah, definitely inspired. I mean, Bolaji said something about being the freedom fighters of today, which is quite a lot, especially because we're in the room with, actual freedom fighters like Dr. Rampele. So it's quite a task at hand. Does anyone else have anything they would like to share or to raise their hands? There's a lot going on in the chat, so I'm also very inclined to pick on people to ask to please share their perspective. Livoy.
Can I invite you to pick on the young people who weren't necessarily on the panel, if they'd like to share anything additional to the contributions, so that we can hear more from them?
Yes, definitely. Looking through here to see other young people. And actually, I know Pearl, You had quite in the breakout room that we had, you had a point that you were sharing on the education system. If you don't mind, please just share it in the main room, because you had incredibly comprehensive viewpoint and opinion on what we could do about education in Africa, especially coming after Neliso's intervention.
Hi, everyone. You're picking on me, Nolita.
Again.
Again, since the other day. There's a lot that we can address and readdress in terms of the education system in Africa, especially to our own individual context. And I really love what Neliso said. I think she summed it up so beautifully in terms of how she actually progressed into the problem, the solutions, and then the way forward and the future that we see right now. I even forgot what I said in the breakout room because I was so excited to say it then. But I think that we do need to reshift and readapt and reframe how we currently see the education system in Africa, because right now it's not really working to prepare the young people of today and the future generations for the future and for tomorrow as well. And except for the young people of today, also looking at the adults, because I feel like there's a lot of wisdom and a lot of learning that can be taken from the, I don't want to say elder generation, because you're as young as you feel, but from the older generations, and there's always that mutual way of learning that we can learn in terms of like the practicalities, practical skills, because I feel like our generation is so absorbed in the digital age that we tend to miss, or we don't really use a lot of the natural instincts and skills that would have been passed down. And it's really sad to see that this wisdom isn't going to be passed through the generations and would be lost along the way. I know one of the speakers did mention that Africa is so rich in storytelling, and I think that's one of the golden resources that we actually have here. I was also speaking to Francois and saying that we shouldn't be looking at first world solutions when we're tackling education in South Africa or any other problems in the African context, because our contexts are so different from each other. Rather, we should be tapping into the resources that we currently have, embracing them and embracing our origins, and see how it can work to our own advantage. Not to say that we can't obviously take in solutions, first dealing with the context of today. How we see the education system in Africa at the moment, speaking to South Africa, where I'm from, and from experience as a student, as a mentor, and as a teacher, and also a coach who has trained teachers, just being in the different angles and dynamics of the education system as well, is we have a long way to go, and we need to start using a bottom-up approach. We need to actually understand from the youth, from the kids, from the teachers themselves, what are the gaps or what are the things that need to be readdressed, instead of looking at first a surface level and then thinking how can we actually provide a solution to that. So we should be looking at it from a bottom-up approach. I did say in the breakout room that there is this movie. It's called Sodium Day. It's a local movie in South Africa, and I think that it aptly captures the state of our education system and the schooling system right now, the vast education inequity which exists, the mentality of the students that you have today because of the communities that they come from, because of how they treated, because of the lack of commitment, patience, and resilience from some of the education practitioners and educators that we have right now. And all of this plays into a negative feedback loop, and that is why we don't see transformation in our education system. I feel like our learning is very didactic in terms of it closes a person's mindset and allow them to only think in a linear fashion. So I remember one of the other speakers saying, it's not about marks, it's not about your qualifications, because these are things that don't define you, but the competencies that are going to actually make you a better individual, a better advocate, and even a working professional, or just make you better in life, are those soft skills. Like, school doesn't teach you empathy. School doesn't teach you how to interact with people. And these are the things that we need to actually instill in young people right now to prepare them for the working world when they enter. I feel that there should be an incorporation of art in school, which we don't really have now, especially in the high needs communities, because these kids and even educators, they come with their own trauma, especially adverse childhood effects. And this also seeps into the adulthood. And remember that your mindset is also how people absorb what you're going to tell them. So if I'm going to be a negative teacher the entire day, my learners are going to be very negative. They're going to look at the situation of the world very negatively. But I feel like we need to introduce this art therapy as a form of healing in a way, and just more innovative approaches, and use the education system to be more project-based. I can write up a whole essay on this. There's so many points.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much, because you raised a lot of points. Specifically, it seems what keeps coming up in this conversation is about what are the competencies, what do we need to know, what do we need to be teaching people, how do we rethink it. I also want to pick on someone who is Karabo Nkoli, who was also at some point South Africa's youngest published author. So Karabo, if you could please also share as a young speaker your view on this topic. Thank you. You're on mute, Karabo.
Hi, everyone. My view on this topic would be that it's important for the elders to mentor us and also walk this journey with us as we find our ways to co-create our country and also our continent, because I feel like it's important that we take inspiration from them, in terms of the things they have achieved and so forth, but also that we try to carve our own way by also trying to find ways by learning from the mistakes that they have made. And I think it's also important that the youth, we create young people who are informed, young people who are conscious of their surroundings, young people who are conscious of what's happening in their countries and in their continents, and eventually in the world. Because the thing is, we have young people now who are informed with everything else but the current affairs of their country. So I think it's, above all things, it's important that we create an environment that leads to young people being conscious of their surroundings, and also while imprinting it with that sense of Ubuntu, that I am because you are, and that whatever affects anybody, it also affects me indirectly. And just to have that sense of responsibility, because I feel like there's a need for us to reclaim that sense of leadership amongst our youth, in the sense that we have to take accountability, understand that you are capable of actually leading those winds of change. And I think that should be also one of the conversations that we have, that the people, the generation of the likes of Dr. Nampela, Rampela, Madiba, and all of them, that they were ordinary human beings like you and I, who organized themselves and challenged the status quo. And that is the same thing with us, that as we should take inspiration from them, but most importantly, take responsibility for our own mission today as we make way for other coming generations. Yes, Thank you.
Thank you so much, Karabo. Thank you. Ubuntu is also one of the things that is continuously coming up in this chat and in the conversation. I had not asked for the permission to do this, but I saw a comment on the chat about Dr. Mpele. You had said something in the breakout room about maybe it is about African youth liberating the future. If you don't mind, please, Matu, please share more about what you mean by that. You're unmute, Ma.
Nolita, you are not allowed to do what you've just done, but anyway, I shall oblige. I'm very excited to hear the power in the voices of young people in this process. And I know there is more where this comes from. And so for me, what this means is that, as was said so eloquently, we just have to reclaim the enormous wealth that we have as a continent and as an earth society. Ubuntu is a free good which our ancient ancestors developed out of understanding that living as they did those many eons ago, there was no way they could survive as human beings alongside tigers and lions and elephants if each one was looking after their own interests. And so the wisdom of Ubuntu is age-old and yet undervalued. My country, which should have been the one that harvested the most from this wisdom, as well as from seeing what not to do in the many countries that preceded our own freedom. We didn't. And the reason we didn't is simply because we didn't take enough time to liberate ourselves from who other people said we were. We didn't take time to liberate, as someone in this wonderful forum said, liberate ourselves from the present, which was shaped by that future, so that we would be ready to reimagine and reinvent, co-create a future that will be infused with this fundamental essence of being human. Being human is by definition being relational. So Ubuntu is not a nice brand that you wave around. It is a deeply spiritual, emotional, and as someone said, that it's not in the head, it's in the heart and in the stomach. Now imagine if what all of you were saying here, which reflects this, that you live these values, those dancers, you can't dance if you don't have that sense of connecting in the ether, connecting, and as you dance, you're connecting with your ancestors, which is why anybody who's trying to become a healer cannot heal until they dance, because it's when they dance that they connect with the spirits of those who have gone by. But we also have to dance in order to connect with the future that is already here, but its shape will be determined by the choices we make. if you choose to be silent when you should be speaking, if you choose to be passive when you should be acting, you are denying your humanity. You are denying your Ubuntu. And I liked so much the link of this Ubuntu by Nokolo to the kind of socio-economic and political relationships that we should have. It's not only our education and training that should be values-based. Everything we do, we cannot have we wouldn't have had state capture in this country had our leaders paid attention to the essence of who they are, instead of thinking of themselves as now is our turn to eat, to become like those colonials who extracted and captured our countries. And so I think the Learning Planet has created a forum, a platform, which is not just an African platform, it is a global platform. My final point is, the world can never be free until Africa is truly free. Because when Africa is free, those stories, those values, the vibes of our ancient ancestors who are our common ancestors would then permeate everything we do. That little child who was praying, the voice he was using is the voice of his ancient ancestors. They are pleading with us. A child should never have to be so insecure as to have to pray for safety. We have the opportunity. We must be bold. I don't want to see another Learning Planet festival, which is about what we think we must do. We should now go to the next festival with, this is what we have done. It's not good enough. It's not, we haven't dreamed boldly enough. I would like to hear bold dreams built on bold actions between now and next year. And you have it all in your hands. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, I apologize. I know that I was just like, please go ahead. But if we have another conversation, as you said, as Livia said, as everyone said, if we have another conversation about these are the challenges and what should we do, and we don't do, then our dreams remain just in our sleep. They don't become actualized. We don't then take the opportunity to, as you said, liberate the future. So then the big question becomes, where do we go from here? This session was an invitation to, as Livia said, to follow through and to follow through practically. This was an ambitious question on reinventing the future. It implies a lot of things. It implies that African youth, as the first civilization, as Dr. Mpilo would say, has a responsibility to reclaim the role of showing the world how we can be a better society. We have that opportunity. And we've had a representation from different viewpoints, different perspectives, from education, from environmentalists like Habib. We've had people from technology. We've had people from technology sector and entrepreneurs. We've had people from different types of organizations that are all coming together, this consensus effort to create and be something new. The Ubuntu Learning Circle convenes, was monthly, will probably be adjusted this year. And this is an invitation to join that circle, to join that conversation. But also this theme that we have, or this conversation that we continue to have on Africanness, on an African sense, was initiated time ago, but also was the Club of Rome created an initiative on the Africa Kili Declaration, which was looking at these values and looking at this African sense. So on the chat also, Rod or Catherine is going to share a link to the Africa Kili Declaration. And also we will close the session with the declaration itself, grounding it again on these values. In this room, or I will dare say at this point, we're a little bit of a community. It's full of ideas, it's full of activity, it's full of action. I will also just extend an invitation to please get in touch, to connect. So again, my email will be shared on there so we can continue to dream and we can continue to work with one another. And also to please also cross-pollinate, not only as the Learning Planet or the Club of Rome as the cornerstone, but also with each other, because this is about networks. It is not about sole individuals with great ideas. Civilizations were not built by individuals, they were built by communities who had a strong sense of self or a mission. So we will continue, so hopefully we will continue to design together and we will have this follow through. So thank you so much to everyone who has joined us. As I said earlier, in closing for this session, we will close with the Africa Kili Declaration and then call it a day. So thank you so much, Diabulela. And Rod, can you please share your screen? Rod, I think you haven't shared with sound. Can you please reshare with sound?
Manifesto ya ufafanuzi chanya kwa Waafrika. Uafrika. Hali ya uzalendo wa kuwa Muafrika ni thibitisho la bara hili na rasilimali yake. Tamko kuu la Waafrika katika umoja wao. Afrika Kili ni tamko rasmi linalotambua Afrika na jukumu lake muhimu katika mabadiliko na maendeleo duniani. Ni utambulisho wa ukuu wake. Ni lango la maarifa yanayowapa Waafrika jukwaa la kushirikiana kimawazo, kimaisha, pamoja na rasilimali yao. Sisi kama Waafrika twatangaza ya kwamba tuamini binadamu sote twashirikiana kwa ubinadamu na bara la Afrika ndilo chimbuko lake. Tunatambua ya kwamba kijumla tabia za kibinadamu zalingana jamii. Tuamini ya kwamba changamoto zetu za tuunda vilivyo. Hekima ya Kiafrika tangu kale yaendelea kutumikia binadamu kwa njia inayojenga hali ya maisha leo na kuhamasisha maendeleo ya kistaarabu. Sisi wa Afrika twatoa mchango muhimu kwa uanuwai wa ubinadamu ulioundwa. Kibinafsi, tuna wajibu kwa utamaduni wetu na vizazi vijavyo. Azimio letu ni kutimiza uzazi bora kwa vizazi vinavyowadia, kuhakikisha tumewaandaa kufuata hatua zetu na kukabiliana na changamoto maishani mwao. Tamaduni zetu za Kiafrika zinathamini ushirikishi, usambazaji na uvumilivu. Afrika, rasilimali yake na tamaduni zake za kijamii tumikia ubinadamu vyema zaidi na maadili haya. Kote Afrika, maneno kama vile Ubuntu na Omenala yametumika kueleza hali zetu za heshima na ujamii. Kutokana na mwingiliano wa watu barani, sote twashirikiana katika ubinadamu sawa. Katika falsafa yetu, utegemeano na uingiliano ni muhimu kwa uelewa wa jamii. Twasherehekea tamaduni za kisayansi Afrika na kuendelea kuchangia maarifa pevu na mapya katika safu ya ulimwengu kwa njia inayodhibitisha ubinadamu wa dunia letu. Twafuatilia mifumo ya maisha na kuendelewa ulimwengu unavyojiendesha. Tunaangalia wakati, maumbile, jamii na kazi kama vielelezo vya mabadiliko ya maisha. Zawadi za kiikolojia kutoka vizazi vya kale zimetupa fursa nyingi zaidi kwa siku zijazo. Hili ni kumbusho kuu la umuhimu wa kuhifadhi na kuendeleza mazingira yetu. Hekima yetu huchimbuka kutoka kwa heshima kuu. Kwa mviringo wa maisha, kiasili na kiroho, tunakumbatia fursa zote zinazotujia na kuendeleza unyororo wa nyakati zilizopita, zilizopo na zijazo. Tuatumai maneno haya yatawa vizazi vya asili na vizazi vijavyo. Asanteni.